Okay, this is a review of Lost Connections, a book by Johann Hari, which is subtitled Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and Unexpected Solutions. What he says in this book is that we have a common view that when we are depressed, this is caused by an imbalance of brain chemicals, and that when we go and see our doctor, he gives us some antidepressant drugs, the purpose of which is to rebalance the brain chemistry and hence return us to a secure sense of self or end our depression. The problem is that most people find that after a while the depressed self reoccurs, and we either need more of the same drug or a different drug. What Harry says is that the secure self is actually made up of much more practical things that happen in our everyday lives, such as access to meaningful work, that is, not work which is a drudge and where you're not valued, contact with other people, not being socially isolated, having meaningful values, that is, not being purely dependent on material values such as I'll be happy when I get the next car or the next relationship or whatever, that having resolved childhood traumas, these quite often are a cause of insecurity and depression, having status and respect from the people that you know, contact with the natural world, and some sort of sense of hope and security about the future. What he says is that when all these things are together, you get the secure self. Now, what he doesn't do is he doesn't completely discount the importance of genes or brain changes, but says that firstly these are relatively unimportant relative to the things which he proposes, but also they're things over which we don't have very much control. So what he says is, if we take a depressed self and we remake all these connections, or at least some of them, we will return to a secure sense of self, that is, our depression will have lifted. The solutions in the book don't precisely follow the 7 suggestions that he makes in the first half. Some of them do, like reconnecting to other people, joining a club or doing a new activity, changing your work to being more meaningful, switching to more intrinsic values rather than extrinsic ones, and resolving childhood trauma. But then there are 3 chapters which look at the issues from a slightly different perspective. This one, called social prescribing, simply means that when you go to see your therapist, instead of them proposing simply that you do a talking therapy or take some drugs, is that the therapist prescribes things like reconnecting with nature or with other people, rather like the suggestions in the book. The second of his different suggestions is to do a practice which he calls Sympathetic Joy. This is a well-known practice, sometimes called the metta-bhavana, or the development of loving kindness. And what you do here is you connect with your own feeling of joy and loving kindness towards either yourself, or if you're depressed, to somebody for whom you feel it, perhaps a child or another relative. And you then try to extend this feeling out to more and more people. And finally, he has a chapter on restoring the future. This is a little bit odd, I felt, because what he does here is he highlights some of the research on universal basic income, that is, where you get enough money to live on without having to work. Now, what I got from this book is not so much that we have to follow his solutions, but that if we follow this type of solution, then we've got a practical checklist to go through in order to improve our mental state. That is, if we want to get rid of our depressed self, we simply have to make some of these connections, and the depression will lift. Now, what I find is that this actually makes sense to me, that it actually does link with times in my life when I have felt depressed and times when I felt more secure. And if I relate it to the people who I know who are depressed, they do tend to have less of these connections, and those who seem to be happy most of the time seem to have more. So I recommend you get this book and use it as a starting point, because it's an empowerment book. It's about what you can do to deal with your depression now.